Order, and welcome to today's hearing of the Energy Security and Net Zero Select Committee, where we welcome Zach and Amanda, who are two of the people who have some experiences to tell us of how disastrously badly things have gone wrong with insulation that they've had fitted in their homes. And they're joined by Shabir and Damian, who are going to back this up with their professional experiences too. But Zach, you were kind enough to write to us and tell us that your mum's home now faces a bill of something like £100,000 to put right the damage done, the insulation that's caused dry rot in the house, I believe.
Yes.
And I think you described you've raised concerns about the regulation in the home retrofit, so in the operation of rogue cowboy installers, and perhaps you can describe for us the mould and the dry rot. I'll come back to you in a moment. But Amanda, your experience goes back a lot further.
Yep.
To 2007, yeah. And you discovered damp, mould and rot within weeks of moving into your home, and you've been putting up with this ever since.
Yep.
So I think you described to us that you've heard every excuse in the book.
Yep.
Right. Well, we want to hear all about it. So what I'm going to do is perhaps start with you, Zach. Tell us your story.
Okay. I guess I just want to start to say I consider myself somewhat privileged to have this audience, but also that I've been able to actually get this far on this case, because most of the people who are affected by the issues that my mum's been affected by, they don't have the support system, they don't have, English may not be their first language, they might be elderly, they might not have relatives there to support them. I've found navigating this system extremely, extremely difficult, and I consider myself competent. I'm not bragging, but I take part in civic society, I write to my local MP, local councillors, I'm part of various residents' associations, so I shouldn't have found this system, navigating this system, as difficult as it has been, and I have, and it's got me here today. But in a nutshell, I guess, my mum had external wall insulation fitted in Q4 2022, done by, it's well documented now, Saviour Energy Solutions Limited. Everything was actually hunky-dory afterwards. The house was really warm afterwards, so Mum thought, great job, it's doing its job. About 12 months after the job was completed, I found a mushroom in her house, a live growing organism in one of her bedrooms. First thing I did was contact Saviour to say, look, think this might be related to the works that you guys have done. Can you come have a look? To their credit, they said they'd send someone over to have a look. And in the meantime, one of my friends had advised me just to get like a damp specialist in to have a look at it separately as well. Saviour, a senior manager from Saviour was meant to attend, didn't quite attend yet, but sent someone who's a roofing specialist to have a look. Went up on the roof, spent half an hour on the roof and came down and said, no, the roof looks perfect. I think it's to do with the cold, probably how your mum's managing the household. Eventually, we did have a roofing specialist go up there, an independent person who wrote a damning 5-page report who with about 20 images saying all of these things are wrong. He'd never seen such a terrible job in his life. But I guess long story short, that mushroom growth, dry rot, I've been told by specialists, can spread at 6+ inches per month, and it can eat through brick, wood, carpet, the whole lot. So the longer it spreads, the more it's eating. It was on the joists as well. So I'd been warned about the house potentially becoming dangerous, where the first floor could fall in. There's been examples of that. Not necessarily to do with insulation work, but to do with just dry rot developing. And then I've just been on essentially the mother of all wild goose chases over the last 2 years, trying to get this resolved. And if you take anything away from today, I would say that all of the institutions and the entities involved, every single one of them, they are all complicit in this. They keep passing the buck. I've been sent round the houses And I just want to reiterate that I've been able to keep going around those houses and keep chasing people. And we were very fortunate that Zoe Conway from the BBC took up this story, and it's only, I think, got here today because it aired on flagship news programmes back in September last year.
Yeah, well, Zach, thank you very much for your telling us your story and what happened. I mean, I can only be, I'm sure everybody is struck by what they've heard and just the unbelievable nature of that story already, and we'll probe into it more in more detail with some further questions to you and your fellow panellists. But the purpose of today's session, and this is true for you, Amanda, as well, is we want the evidence of what's gone wrong. You mentioned that about being a warm home, and obviously everybody wants a warm home and they want cheaper bills. We want what our job as a committee is to gather that evidence, to make recommendations to the government to make sure these things don't happen to other people, and to support you and other victims in getting redress as well. So thank you for your opening comments. Amanda, yours is a longer story, sadly, but
a sorry tale of woe.
Yeah.
So, I'm a leaseholder, a long leaseholder. I have a pretty unresponsive freeholder. I bought the property from my grandmother, who bought it under the right to buy, when she had been rehoused by our council due to a compulsory purchase. She had a stroke, and I bought the property off her because she could no longer live at home. Within a few months of moving in, there was issues with damp, so I contacted the freeholder, which is North Devon Homes, now a charity, but I think they were a social landlord at that time. And I started saying to them, what's wrong with the house here? And first of all, they wouldn't respond. Then they did respond, and then they said they would do it under the next planned major works, which came and went, and the damp persisted. So we had a 10-year argument about there being something wrong with my house, and eventually I nailed them when they were extracting other people's cavity wall insulation all over the valley where I live, and said, I must have been one of the longest complaining people here. Why are you not dealing with my house? And I was told, well, we have other obligations to our tenants that aren't extended to our leaseholders. So I'm a mortgaged owner-occupier with a house that somebody else is destroying, and I cannot fix it. I cannot undertake the work myself because they are liable for the structure. However, recently, I've inherited some money, and we've decided we can't stand it anymore because this is 8 years after the first 10 years, and my partner and I just started ripping our floors up, ripping our joists out, and replacing from the foundations upwards in 2 of our rooms. We haven't been into our kitchen yet, but we think it'll be exactly the same there. My house is riddled with woodworm. It's like a super high where my subfloor ventilation is, which is below my damp-proof course. I have a mixed fill of bead and old blown fibre in situ now. I have 1 complete wall extracted and 2 with the most bodged job you could ever imagine, which I'm sure there are all over England. And I'm here today because I could not force my leaseholder to do anything about it. And when I have asked to see the seed guarantee, there is some dispute there is any guarantee for the work whatsoever.
Well, thank you again for coming here and telling us your story, and it is unbelievable. It really is.
Sorry, Chair. I have 10 years of back and forth and then 8 years of bodged installs.
Yeah, sure. Okay, we'll get into the detail as well, but just tell us what's been the impact on you personally. Amanda, do you want to
I think you become institutionalised by the state of the house you're living in. We don't have any wallpaper in our bedroom. We don't have any flooring down because that's long gone. We've got bare floorboards throughout. All our plaster is moulded in our 2 bedrooms. Despite being professionally mould washed, it has come back. All our soft furnishings are damaged. All our decoration is damaged, and we've decorated numerous times. I've just stopped decorating because it's pointless. We've had mushroom growth. I'm not sure it was dry rot, but I wouldn't like to say it wasn't. And it's just, when you come home at the end of the day, it's where you want to relax. We've got 3 businesses. We're very busy people. We've got the same things going on in life as everyone else, sick parents, things to sort out, illness, and on top of it, it just wears you down. It completely wears you out. I've actually got, I think, battle fatigue from it, because I just didn't even want to be here today. And about 3 weeks ago, I said to them, come and take the rest of the insulation out and leave us alone, because I just want to fix my house now. Because the housing ombudsman, who I have a case with, said, one way or another, the damage has got to be fixed. So you may as well start doing it. So when we took our bedroom floor up, our joists are rotten through with woodworm. Like literally, as we're taking the floorboards off, they're just breaking.
Yeah.
I put my hand in the wall, in the subfloor vent, and pulled out wet, blown fibre, insulation 2 weeks ago. And this is after 3 extracts.
Yeah.
And this is what you've got going on in the industry right across Britain, because I won't be the only one like Zach.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. It's not necessarily external. This is bead and blown fibre mixed quite openly in my walls today now. And that should never be happening.
I completely agree. Look, I am so sorry this has happened to both of you, and we want to use this session to help to get to the bottom of it. Zach, what's been the personal impact on you and on your mum?
I think Amanda said it all, to be honest. I'm just shattered. I work full-time, very busy job. I'm a carer. I don't have time to deal with any of this. So lots of people have given up, but you alluded to it earlier, Chair. The costs are well north of £100,000 now. If I had to give you a real guesstimate, I think the longer it's taking, the worse it's getting. So we're probably around the 200,000 mark now, to the point where people are asking me, wouldn't it be easier for them to knock your mum's house down and rebuild it? I've lost sleep over this. I have just made so many calls, written so many emails, spent hours every evening after work writing emails, chasing the bodies involved, the company itself, dealing with their mediator as well. So there's a mediator involved now as well, who was all, flowers and roses initially, but is doing the bidding of the company, right? They're being paid by the company. They were there initially to help us both come to a resolution, and we're just, again, the wild goose chase continues. But I'm just shattered, and I can't imagine how anyone, like, this is a government scheme. People are reassured that, this is government scheme, this is government funded, this is what my mum thought she was getting. So you think you can... We've all heard stories about rogue traders, but this was supposed to be something legitimate, right? And I'm tired. It's got me here, but I just want to see this nightmare end for my mum. Do you know what? The worst thing she said was she wants to be able to die. She's had to move out, and she wants to be able to return to her house so she can die in her house.
Thank you. It is one of the questions for the second panel, actually. How on earth is this allowed to happen, given it was a government scheme? But I'm just going to ask you both one more question, then pass on to some of the other members of the committee. Would either of you recommend to friends and family to have energy efficiency measures installed in your homes?
Depending on what type of energy measures they were, possibly, but I would never, ever agree to have insulation again. Never.
Thank you.
Well, I didn't agree to have it in the first place, to be honest.
You moved in after it was installed. Yeah,
it's okay. The same for insulation, absolutely. I've actually been proactively telling people not to. Yeah. You'd be better off living in a cold house, paying higher bills, than go, because the industry is not regulated properly. Everyone's marking their own homework, so they're just patting themselves on the back, making thousands of pounds, and people are being left to do. Since this report, by the way, Chair, I've had so many people locally getting in touch saying, who should we contact, because we've had issues. At least 20 plus people get in touch about this. So I'm just telling people, don't get it done.
Okay. Well, thank you both very much for your opening comments. I'm going to pass over to Bradley Thomas to ask you some more questions.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Zach and Amanda. And I'm sorry to hear what's happened as well, because it sounds that what you're going through and what your mum in particular as well, Zach, is going through is probably not just really soul destroying, but you think, what's the point? So when this commenced, what were the first steps in the retrofit process, and what kind of advice did you receive, and what sort of credentials were presented as to the sort of authenticity of whoever was giving advice, and how suitable the installation was going to be for the homes? And that's a question for both of you.
Want to go first?
Yep, sure. So very little advice from what I can remember. It just seemed legitimate because it's a government-funded scheme, or it's a government scheme anyway, authorised scheme. I've since learned about what the process should be, which I'm sure I'll come on to in a bit, but essentially you have what's called a lead generator who just goes door knocking, telling people, oh, we can install a free boiler, do the installation or whatever, and then they don't tend to be employed by the company itself. They just tend to get a referral fee, I think, if it all goes through, and then the company comes along and just gets started. What happens in the background is there's a retrofit designer who's probably qualified to design the insulation system, and I'm sure Shabir will explain later on because he knows a lot more about that than me. What I found out is the process is meant to be, once the design is drawn up, they're meant to sit with you to tell you about the options. This is how your house makeup is. This is the design we've drawn up, so it fits well with the house. None of that happened. They basically get the approval for the funding, send over some workers, and the scaffolding goes up, work begins.
It sounds from what you say that it's sort of driven by, get the grant, get the money, and just install a solution.
Yeah.
Sounds like that's what happened to you.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think so. And I think that's happened to loads of people too.
Yeah.
My position is very different. I've had absolutely no say in the process whatsoever. My freeholder has been entirely responsible for everything that's happened to my home.
So you've been involved in none of the conversations or anything?
Not a single conversation about how, why,
Yeah.
should it be. We did force them to undertake some surveys, which the people installing undertook, and they did point out to the freeholder there were a number of issues with the housing, but they still went ahead with the work, and the freeholder still let them. They said there was trouble with our lintels, our brushes at the bits at the top of the roof, cloaking, cracks, lateral cracks to the render. There was render missing at the bottom of the walls, above our damp-proof course. And they still went ahead and installed, and they still went ahead and paid them to do it.
Just to confirm, Amanda, that was before you moved in? So
No, that's since I moved in.
Right,
That's
okay.
after I finally forced them to take out the old blown fibre that was absolutely saturated. This is the new installs from 2017 onwards.
Retrofit of the retrofit.
Yeah, I've got double retrofit.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to add on what Zach's discussed. Because as a council, we have a duty to our residents. So what Zach has presented, that many of our residents, English isn't their first language, they don't understand retrofit. It's never ever explained to them. The lead generation, the person who knocks on the door, is the only point of contact. Never does he ever disclose which installer company is doing the works or is behind the works. So when a complaint comes to ourselves as a council, we have to work out who is the installer company behind this work, which can be a task in itself. Once we identify, we then take it through the proper channels, which is we go to TrustMark and we go to the relevant accreditation body the installer company is part of. What happens is then the resident is just sent around in a circle and they come back to us as a council because they're not getting any closure, they're not getting any help or assistance. So then at the end, the only solution I found with our residents is if I know who the installer is, I can find the email address, I can email them, I copy in TrustMark, I copy in the relevant accreditation body, the relevant bodies, and only then will the installer company react. For months and months and months, they will ignore the residents' calls, ignore emails, ignore any contact. One thing is that failed to mention, which is important, I think they took, was it £8,000 from you, Zach? £6,000. So this is a government grant scheme. It's a free scheme. But these people are not only just mis-selling the benefits of the scheme, additionally they're taking the money off residents in vulnerable conditions, they're in poor households. And this has been going on for 2 years. As you know, we've been a lead council in this. We've been leading this in the country, where I have been knocking on everyone's doors, as well as DESNES, Ofgem, and I've got emails to back everything up I've been saying, what our residents have been saying, and we've never got any satisfactory response. It's only due to the BBC programme, which highlighted what happened at Zach's home, that now we're seeing that bodies are now beginning to do something, but not necessarily the right thing. I just want to add one last thing. I know TrustMark is here and they are taking a lot of the flag, but in respect of TrustMark, we have been working with them and we are working closely with them to look at the extent of the problem, especially in Luton, and how we can identify positive steps to go forward. So there's a lot of information we have that I'm happy to share as we go on.
Just a quick follow-up. One of my fears with any scheme like this is that when there's a government grant that's available, a sort of an illicit kind of underbelly emerges in any industry to kind of exploit the grants that are available. Do you feel in this case that that's happened? Yeah.
Okay. As you know, many councils, we rely on these grant schemes to help the vulnerable households that live in fuel poverty, high energy bills, cost of living. We wholeheartedly welcome energy efficiency grant schemes and we promote them. I think what I've seen in my investigating and looking at the processes throughout, accountability, no one takes accountability of the issues. Everyone bypasses, which then makes the grant scheme seem like a failure when it's actually something positive and we welcome. I think personally, look, if there was accountability, responsibility, then these schemes will be successful. But unfortunately, what we're seeing is that they're saying there's regulations here, but why we're seeing rogue installs going on, poor workmanship, damage to people's houses, which is now costing hundreds of thousands to rectify.
Just a very quick one for you, Shabir and Damian. Who do you think householders should consult for advice before proceeding on schemes? And do you think that it's government that should foot the bill for the advice that people are receiving so that it's delivered in sort of an accredited fashion?
Okay, so this is going back to an email that I did send to Desnes, and I will share this afterwards. Why I did stipulate that someone needs to, whether it's TrustMark, should set up a dedicated helpline. So where there are complaints, they go to TrustMark, and then TrustMark can then filter out to the relevant bodies to investigate further. Never got any response. I mean, the standard response, unfortunately, I've been receiving is, well, tell trading standards. Well, first of all, you're telling us local authorities not to get involved. So trading standard belongs to a local authority. It's part of our division. Or go to citizens' advice, and citizens' advice saying, well, what can we do because it's a government scheme? I've always said there should be a centralised helpline, that where people have had issues, they can just ring this number and talk to someone, and they could then pass on the information to the relevant bodies to then investigate further. That was my recommendation 2 years ago to DESNES, TrustMark and Ofgem.
My name's Damian. I own a company called Cavity Extraction. We specialise in removing of failed energy measures. The problems that we see on a daily basis is exactly what you've just heard. My business shouldn't exist. It does, because the workmanship is horrendous. The guarantees aren't worth the paper they're written on, and everybody is being hoodwinked constantly about these guarantees. In the Sunday Times just recently, they all pointed at EWI. It is EWI, but it's also cavity wall insulation. TrustMark, I'm a member of. My company is, and we're not an installer, but we qualify for it because the type of work that we work in, we have to have that as a body. They are small and need to grow. The industry, they haven't got enough to sort this problem out. There isn't enough people. It needs to grow. It needs government backing, and it doesn't matter what colour party you are, if you're red, green, blue, yellow, whatever it is. I've been in this industry for 10 years, and before that I was in this industry for 10 years working for installers, working for British Gas, and I saw it then. I understand where the rest of the panel here, they're talking about how exhausting it is. It is. I banged the drum for the first 5 years of my business, and for 2 years I took a back step because it is so exhausting, and I see it from their point of view. I understand this industry and I see it on a daily basis. The guarantees of the properties, cavity wall insulation, there's probably about 14.5 million, probably a bit more, 15 million if you went to Ofgem and asked them how many cavity wall installs there's been done. If you go and research cavity wall insulation failures, the BBA, which is a TrustMark type business, over in Northern Ireland had an inquiry into their housing stock. God knows why it was done over there, maybe to keep it off the radar. But it was done over there. 75% of the housing stock in Northern Ireland is either failing, or wrongly installed. If you apply that to 14.5 million properties in the UK, we've got 10.6 million homes with the possibility of failed cavity wall insulation, that the guarantees aren't worth the paper they're written on. They put caveats. We're dealing with people where we've got fuel poverty. Do you think they're really going to put money aside that they've saved from an install aside for just in case we need some maintenance on the property? And then when it does fail, the guarantee companies will go, oh, well, look at that. You've got maintenance issues with your house. They haven't got the money to maintain those properties. So all of a sudden we've got wet blankets around people's houses who were meant to be helping with fuel poverty. Is costing them more to heat their houses now than it did do when it was in its virgin state. That the calculation is about 0.9 tonnes extra carbon their house needs to heat to a recommended standard, and we have just put them out. Doesn't matter, let's throw them out there, and they have nowhere to go. The guarantee people deliberately take them down a one-way street, and then they turn around and go, let's go to an ADR process. There's a file here of a process where in Blackpool, where the customer had sand in the cavity. That sand should have been removed before an install. They had an install of insulation on top of it, and when it went to the ADR process, they turned around and went, that sand's got in there after the insulation. Unless they're a magician, that would have been the right idea. This is wrong, and I see it every single day. EWI. There's a really publicised scheme of EWI at Fishwick in Preston, and I have been one of the main contractors addressing and ripping it off because it's wrong. It's wrong because of cheap silicons. It's wrong because the details are wrong. And those houses with mushrooms on, I've seen it many times. Zoe Conway from the BBC was actually seeing it herself. I've been in a house where they left a dinner plate sized mushroom on the wall and they wanted to show me. And I'm there reaching for my pocket, looking for a pocket knife to cut it off the wall because it shouldn't be there. And this is because of the guarantees. Early last summer, I was here in the House of Commons in the Westminster again, with giving evidence and explaining about the SSB law. SSB law is a combination of, it's a perfect storm. You've got the guarantee companies that have given guarantees for cavity wall insulation. Bufka, with the SSB law in particular, doesn't exist anymore. They put foam cavity wall insulation in these properties that shouldn't have cavity insulation. To fix each one of those houses is £65,000. The houses are only worth £90,000. We can't. What are you going to do there? The guarantee that Bufka used to offer was for £1,500. So who's going to pick up those 30,000 homes along the M62 corridor that have all been filled with urethane foam? And then we look at Seeger's the biggest one, Nigel Donohue's Seeger company. They have probably the most guarantees in the UK. Why aren't we dealing with them properly? Oh, you've got a maintenance issue. Oh, you've had your windows changed. Well, if I don't change my windows, you'll come back to me and say, well, you've disturbed the insulation. Or if I don't change my windows, you've got a maintenance issue. Your windows are rotten. They're in a no-win, no situation, and it's wrong. And my personal feeling is all of these guarantee companies, it all needs to be brought in-house. We talk about domestic energy assessors and retrofit coordinators. They do a 5-day course or a month course. Our ICS surveyors are at it 3 years, and they only do and that's just to get the degree. Use people with experience to deal with them, because this is where the problem is. The guarantees are wrong. The people who are knocking on the doors, putting them in, they're after the money. And it's not just about the install. It's about the carbon. The carbon that we signed up to in 1992 with the Kyoto Agreement, and then subsequently gone up further along the line with the Paris Agreement.
Damian, I'm going to stop you there. Thank you very much. We'll come back to you. There's going to be more, but that's very, very helpful, very insightful.
Sorry, I
Shabir.
do go.
No, not at all, not at all. Amanda, yes.
Just interject, Chair. From an energy efficiency point of view, we're quite often told, right throughout the valley where I live, to turn your heating up and open your windows. How can that possibly be energy efficient? That is the standard given thing. You're not heating your house properly and you're not ventilating it, so you need to turn your heating up and open your windows. Can you please, anyone in this room, make sense of that? And we're told that by our freeholder over and over and over again.
Yes, it completely defeats the object, yes.
Well, we're using more energy than we would be if we had dry homes.
Indeed. Right, I'm going to move on to another member of the committee, Luke Murphy, please.
Thanks very much, and thank you, Zach and Amanda, for sharing your stories. I'll come to Zach first, if I may. So I just want to focus on what happened when you noticed things had gone wrong. Was it easy to work out who it was you should be complaining to?
No, not at all. I contacted the installer. Thankfully, I was very lucky that I actually knew who the installer was. To Shabir's point earlier, most people only have the lead gen contact. They only have a mobile number and often just contact via WhatsApp messages. In all honesty, the examples I've come across locally, I had the installer's number. I rang the installer. To their credit, they were like, yes, we'll come round, we'll send someone. Obviously, they sent a cowboy who said the roof is all fine, this is a problem, nothing to do with the works, until we got our own specialists in independently to have a look. Eventually, I found a certificate which had TrustMark. So some of the paperwork that was left with my mum, I found, and I contacted TrustMark. I had never heard of them until that point. Contacted the TrustMark helpline, who took the details, address details and name, and said, give us a couple of days, we'll come back to you with the scheme provider or the accreditation body who they were registered with, the installer, and you need to raise your complaint with the accreditation body, which is what I did. The accreditation body is NAPIT, and I contacted them, and what I meant when I said earlier on about being sent around the houses, so TrustMark told me to take it up with the accreditation body, and then NAPIT, the accreditation body, told me they encourage everyone to resolve it with the installer. So problem I had with that, and I said it as much to NAPIT, was they've obviously done a very shoddy job in the first place and marked their own homework. So how can I trust them to go back to fix it when they're using cowboys, essentially. And they said, well, this is the process. You've got to do this. And then I spent the next, I guess, 2 years now just going round in circles between the installer, the accreditation body, and TrustMark. And this is what I meant when I said earlier, everyone is complicit, because there's no one entity holding anyone to account. The buck doesn't seem to stop with anyone, right? If it should stop with someone, I'd love to know who it is and who's been given that responsibility, and who, is it Ofgem? Is it government? Is it TrustMark? Is it because it's not, and I've just been fortunate enough that I've been able to keep chasing this, but people have been stuck and spent their own money to trying to do their own repairs. I'll tell you, I guess, because I had an inkling that I could only visibly see some mushrooms, some damp, some dry rot. I couldn't actually see what's going on with the rest of the property, because I thought, if they've done a really bad job, I'm not skilled in this area. You need a professional to come and look at the whole job and say what's not been done to standard. So even something that looks right might not be right. I practically begged, and I'm not kidding you, I practically begged over email TrustMark and NAPIT to send someone round. Because I said I couldn't trust the company. Can you guys just, because of how bad it is, could you do it? They said no. They said no to me in writing so many times, and I still kept going back to them with a begging bowl, saying it's much worse than I expected it would be. But as soon as the BBC report went out, everyone and their mother wanted to get involved. I got a call. I'll preface what I'm about to say, because since that report, TrustMark has been very helpful. I know Simon's here. But prior to that report, no one wanted to know. I wrote to the CEO of TrustMark in March last year, no response. Then in April again, no response. Then in May, I wrote again on the email ticket that I had, on the support ticket, and I CC'd the CEO. And even then, no response from the CEO, right? Appreciate that's a very busy person, very demanding job, but someone's contacting you about some extremely serious issues going on in your industry where you should be responsible for looking after. No response. And I just got an email back from whoever was looking after the ticket saying, we're aware that you're in touch with the CEO, we're going to try and resolve it. But all they did was just saying, we can just poke and prod NAPIT, the accreditation body, right? And I said I'm shattered earlier because I've just been going round and round in circles, and no one's being held to account here.
Can I ask what reason, when they were denying you that they would help and referring you back to the installer, what reason you were given by TrustMark and the accredited provider for not sending someone? I'm
laughing because there was no reason. There was just we couldn't possibly do it. So the TrustMark says we don't do this. NAPIT, the accreditation body, said no, we cannot possibly do this. Funnily enough, after the BBC report, NAPIT sent some inspectors round. And I did ask them, I said, you said you couldn't possibly do this. Why is it that it took a national TV report for you to send to inspectors? And on that, before I forget, by the way, so they came along October the 15th, off the top of my head, last year. There was about 20 people at my mum's house, including Shabir, including, to his credit, Simon was there, CEO of TrustMark, with one of his staff members. NAPIT said they're going to produce a report. It took them more than 6 weeks to produce the report. I mean, when the inspectors came, before they even stepped inside the house, they were shaking their heads because they could see from the outside, without even going upstairs, just how a terrible job it was from the outside. I kept chasing for that report after they visited, and they kept saying to me, oh, your report's got to be vetted. It's going through multiple layers of approval before we can release it to you. When they released that report to me 6 weeks later, I kid you not, that report had so many typos and grammatical errors, I was insulted by that report. I was like, it went through that many layers of approval. Is this how much importance, how much weight you're putting on this report that someone hasn't proofed this document before? It was pathetic.
Thank you. Amanda, I'm going to come back to you if I may, because I just want to kind of ask Shabir how common a story that is where people are unable to identify, where they're basically referred back to by the accredited schemes or TrustMark back to, in your experience, back to the installer, rather than, how common is it following complaints for someone to actually get someone on site to see what the issues are?
Very common. very, very common, to the extent I had a colleague in the council who had the external wall done, so many issues. So I explained to her the process and the channels she needs to go through. And she came back to me almost in tears saying, what is the point of these accreditation bodies, because they're not doing anything? I've given them evidences, photographic, written statements, and they've taken the side of the installer. And this is a very common story I hear from residents, you know, because, sort of going back to earlier, when you work with a resident, you follow the process that the accreditation body has. It's past 2030 process, which is you know, they contact the installer. If the installer doesn't respond, then you escalate it to the accreditation body. Then the accreditation body investigates the complaint, allegedly, and then they'll take appropriate actions. Many times, you know, when it gets to the accreditation body, I'll always get the resident coming back to me and saying, they're not doing anything, please can you help me? I had to diverse my own methodology.
I just do you understand how a complaint can be investigated without a physical visit?
So basically, yeah, I do actually. What they do is they take a statement from the resident, and they ask them to provide photographic evidence.
Yeah.
Then they go to the installer company, who's part of their accreditation scheme. Then they'll ask for their information from them, but then they'll never come back and tell us what the final decision was, what the outcome was. So they'll just write to a resident saying, we've investigated it and we've closed it, with no remedial.
And Damian, it's kind of similar question really, because you must come across similar.
I see every single day. I lead my company by boots on the ground. I don't sit behind a desk. I've got people, I employ people to do that for me. I go and visit houses. I see mould, I see damp, I see rotten joists, and they've all tried, let's try and go down this route with a guarantee company or the guarantee who installed it. A lot of the installers set up and disappear. If the installers are still about, they will deny it until the cows come home because it's expensive. EWI, external wall insulation, is probably the most expensive, and that is the next perfect storm that's coming. Cavity wall insulation has been and will be and continue to be a problem. We extract it. We take it back to its virgin state because a dry envelope is easier to heat than a wet envelope. And there was a lady in Blackpool called Shirley Wild. She used to have all her family round every Christmas to her house, and she was really house proud, and her house was destroyed by cavity wall insulation. We ended up helping her with the South Shore MP and actually had the installer brought back, and she won a claim against him, and we removed that insulation back. She sent me, just last Christmas, she sent me a message saying, thank you very much. I've had my family round and I've fallen in love with my house again. That is it's not all about money for me, and you can go and look at HMRC and whatever. This is about helping people, and this is why my business is growing year on year. Last year we did 500,000 gross. Right? I don't want it to be big. I just want to be able to give and deliver quality, and that's what we do. That's why I'm in demand everywhere. Housing associations want me to speak to them all the time, but I see it every day, and this is wrong.
Thank you.
There's no recourse.
Just wanted to come back to Amanda, because it sounds like yours is a different situation in that, it doesn't sound like you even know who installed.
Oh yes, I do, because I went and talked to them.
Oh right, okay.
Oh yes, I'm quite.
Could you just say a bit about your experience about how you went about sort of making the initial complaint? And
when I first realised they're doing the work on a neighbouring property, I went and said, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? How is it? What do you think the problem is? And they said, well, the cavity wall insulation has failed. probably should never have been installed in the first place, but that's going back way before any of this. That there was rubble and debris in the bottom of the cavities, that was above the DPC, that render was missing at the bottom of the buildings, allowing water to just penetrate straight into the cavity and then wick into the interior walls. There's probably about 10 different houses that have had this work done, so it's not just our house. It's endemic in our estate. I went out and I knocked doors, and out of 25 people, 19 have damp issues of the 25 I found at home on that day. Some of them will still have the blown fibre in. Some have got mixed fills with blown fibre and ball. So then they came to do ours. They actually said to us, we really don't want this contract. The housing stock is in such a state here, it's going to cost us a fortune to undertake the work, and we'd rather not have the contract. They then sold out to the next firm, LCX. They've been round, and exactly like Zach said, they've been round and policed their own work after the event and told us it's all fine, even though I bought a borescope and took my own photos of my own cavities that are full of rubbish, black bags, debris, mixed fill, no fill, large voids. Oh, that's all fine. I sent that into my freeholder. They don't want to know about it. But they've had them, if there's no problem, I've now had 3 extractions and 2 fills. So there must be a problem, or that work would not have been taken out, carried out.
Have you had any interaction with the accreditation bodies or?
No, because I don't have the guarantee, because I didn't pay for the work. That was my freeholder.
I'm aware of time. Can I ask one final question?
Yeah, sure. I think do you want to get Damian to?
Yeah, but maybe I'll come back to Damian.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
Yeah, if that's right. So just beginning with Zach, and maybe just going along. How can the redress system be improved? What would you want to see? Like, it's happened. You need to make a complaint. How could it be clearly significantly improved from where it is now?
I think it needs to be done centrally. It needs to be done independently. I don't know if TrustMark or there's accreditation bodies can still be involved. Damian made a point earlier. I think he was alluding to this is the next big scandal. I truly think this is the next big. Everyone's familiar with Horizon, Post Office, and the infected blood scandals, right? In 5, 10, 15 years, I don't want to be watching something on TV with this going on where there's 65,000 houses with about 50% of them that need repairs upwards of £100,000 that we as taxpayers are going to have to pay. Right, this needs to be done centrally. People need to stop marking their own homework. So all of these companies, they had their own inspector come and do. He saw the state of the. If the accreditation body shook their head when they stood out the house, how could an inspector from the installer walk around the house and inside for 2 to 3 hours, tick everything on their list, and then issue the TrustMark certificate? How is it that an independent person did not come round to mark this work, to make sure? I had to arrange for a chartered surveyor who specialises in retrofit, which is very difficult to find, by the way. I only got very lucky, and he could rattle off every building standards protocol that was broken a part of this job. So this needs to be independently done. We've just basically, it's been allowed, Fishwick was mentioned earlier, 12 years ago in 2013, we're 2025, and we're still talking about this now, right? So,
Amanda?
I'm totally in agreement with, it's all, people need to be out on the ground that are independent of any of this, that are probably government-based, and they need to be putting borescopes in walls and taking the photos, because the evidence is out there and it's everywhere. And there's no denying, it's irrefutable. It's in our walls now, and it's wet, and it's causing wicking, and it's destroying our homes and our lives.
Shabir? Shabir first, and then I'll come to Damian.
Sorry, so just a couple of things before I answer. I think we've got to look at the cost to the economy to this, because poor homes, unhealthy homes means there's a strain on the NHS as well. Okay. The cost to local authorities, one of the things I didn't allude to is the amount of fly tipping and we have to clear up from these installers. It's a massive cost to us, means that council tax goes up, insurance premiums and so forth. I think one of the recommendations I've made is that I think local authorities should be more involved and help the police and give us the support, financial support, that we can help police it and report back to relevant bodies.
Damian?
Just what Amanda was saying, I was chatting to Amanda just down the corridor there before. She lives within 1 mile of the coast. If you look at the BBA rules of installation for most of the products, shouldn't be within 7 kilometres of the coast, I think it is, off the top of my head. That means every house in Blackpool shouldn't be filled, but they all are. Every house in Whitehaven shouldn't be filled, but they all are. Anywhere on the Welsh coast or in the South Wales, they are. Hal Williams banged the drum for years as a Welsh MP and didn't get the notification or the honour of saying how much this problem is, and it is. I don't think he's an MP anymore, but he's retired or whatever, but he was very good at trying to bring awareness. It's all down to money. White fibre is the cheapest product you can put in a cavity, but it's like cotton wool when you take your makeup off at night if you watch your wife. It turns to slop, right, when it's wet. This is the problem that we have. Polystyrene bead is a bit better, but when it's glued, it does have voids and it holds water as well. Our housing stock really is the problem, I think, here. The guarantees are a problem. The UK can sort this out, but it's going to cost a lot of money. And it needs to be from everyone. It is not just this, what we've just talked about just briefly. Planning and, Shabir here work with the council. How many installs in the UK, because you've changed the fabric of the building, the guarantee companies were meant to inform building control. When you do something to your house and it's not building controlled orientated, that's a criminal offence, isn't it? I can tell you, in the north, 65% of housing stock that's had cavity wall or external wall insulation, they haven't got building control over them because I've checked. Who's at fault?
Thank you all very much for your answers. Now we've hit 4 o'clock, which was going to be the end, the deadline for this panel. We're going to carry on for a few more minutes before we get to the next panel, but the answers a little bit shorter for the remainder of your time. Starting with Mike Reader, please.
Thank you very much for some really detailed accounts today, and actually that helps me a lot because I can perhaps jump around some of my questions to fill in just some gaps in my understanding. And I was interested in some of the independent checks that were or weren't done. You've talked a lot about once the work was finished, but Zach and Amanda, were there any checks done to the proposals by anyone before the works were undertaken? Was there anyone who was checking that what was proposed was right for your home before the work started?
You would have to ask my freeholder because they dealt with the entire process.
And in my mum's case, no, because I found out since that the checks and balances should have been done by the installation company themselves, and there should have been a sit down with the designer or someone in the company to explain what's going to be done. None of that happened. Yeah. These are essentially just rogue traders because they're making, I think some of them are making millions. They've been operating for more than a decade, not just Eco4, which is the problem that my mum's been, because various schemes have been in place for more than a decade, right? Some of these companies have been doing boiler installations and underfloor installation for years.
My last installer has had 4 different installation companies that have wound up, and he's just reopened another one to avoid responsibility.
I'd like to come back to that. That's a really interesting point, Amanda. So bear with me as I jump through my questions a little bit. Shabir, I was interested in you talking about trading standards because I wanted to ask whether you thought they were effectively able to enforce against rogue installers. But it sounds like your experience is that actually advice is that trading standards, because they're part of the local authority, shouldn't be progressing this. Is that what I understand from what you said?
It's very difficult for our trading standards to enforce it. We did bring in an installer company because of the number of installs. We had a huge number of complaints, and we went through basic past requirements they should be following, which they were just confused and thought, we don't need to do this. At the end, trading standards said, you know what, you should have been closed down. Yeah. We don't know how you're trading. Can I just add one point that very quickly Damian touched upon was So external wall insulation has to be registered and installed by a competent person installer. We've got numbers working with TrustMark, so we've had in Luton 4,215 external wall insulation works done. Only 782 have been registered with the council. 18% has been registered, which deems 3,175 installs are illegal. Now, as a council, we could take enforcement action, but we decided not to because it's going to cost the homeowner £1,000 just for the inspection plus the remedial cost, because ultimately it's the homeowner that's responsible. And again, this is something the installers are failing to do, an additional cost to the homeowner.
And
the installers know full well local government cannot afford prosecution. They know it full well.
I find it quite interesting. For disclosure, I worked in the construction industry for nearly 20 years, and when I was first civil engineer, clerk of works and resident engineers were very common, but it sounds like there is no independent checking of this work. Do you think in future government programmes for retrofit, for heat pumps, etc., that there should be a government authorised clerk of works, resident engineer, someone checking this work as it's going ahead? Damian, I'll come to you first.
Clerk of works is where our industry's gone wrong. Bring them back. They were treated like God on site. They walked around and what they said, you did. There's no clerk of works. We're self-policing all these retrofit schemes, and because of that, they get away with it. Planning applications, I will just do that scheme. We'll just add those houses on. No. What Shabir said, there's no application for them. Clerks of works checks the quality of the work. When you're putting stuff in cavities, you can look, you can boroscope, you can use thermal imagery. I've got a drone company with thermal imagery capability. We can look and see if it's been done. The schemes that I've looked at over the winter, this winter, that have been a retrofit remedial scheme, and they're wrong. I see it now. And it goes on and on. We have got this perfect storm coming here, and it's going to cost a lot of money, but it needs cooperation from all parties to sort it out.
Damian, can I ask just two final quick questions? I'm conscious that the Chair wants us to try and stick to time. Do you think TrustMark and MCS are effectively able to monitor and sanction installers?
The installers are usually tied to the guarantee company. So if you're a cavity wall installer, you will be tied because you are a competent installer, but they police themselves and send their photographs to the guarantee companies and say, look, this cavity's empty. I've got a photograph here only 2 or 3 weeks old, and it's got wool and polystyrene in.
Yeah.
It is two different products, will cause a differentiation between the insulation values and cause condensation.
Yeah.
Exactly what Amanda was saying, exactly the same, and that will happen again. You need to take it out, and you need a third party to take it out. You can't be an installer and an extractor at the same time. You need that person to take it out, because the installer will come along, look inside the cavity and go, we can't install on that. That's what you really need. You need a third party to check the works that you can install and it's right.
I'll bring Shabir and Amanda in very, very quickly. Go on.
So we've been talking to TrustMark about this, and one of the proposals that Simon made, and I fully agree with, is bringing a licensing scheme. So TrustMark and MCS, which I fully agree, and I'm sure Simon will elaborate further.
I think probably going forward, because it causes such detriment to people's health and the way they live, should be like a gas check. You should, if you're a social landlord, have to do it every so often. And if you're... see, from my point of view, if my mortgage company finds out about the state of my house, where does that leave me? Mm-hmm. So surely there has to be some obligation for there to be a check which is carried out like a gas check to make sure my home is safe and is still mortgageable. Because when this all comes out, there's going to be a lot of trouble within the mortgage industry. It's got a lot of houses now that are devalued, and we've got negative equity, because my house isn't worth what my mortgage was, because it's been so badly destroyed.
I'm just
And
going
that's
to
going to be
ask
another can
one
of
final
worms.
question, and again, it's worth noting that there's a very strong proposal of Federation of Master Builders on licensing, because they've recognised this issue right across the sector that we should definitely note as a committee. Are you aware of any directors of these companies described as rogue traders by some of the panel actually being struck off and those directors being unable to trade any further?
Not yet, but they should be.
Shabir, no.
No.
My installer's had 4 companies. He's still working now.
Can I just, it's really for your previous question, Mike, about TrustMark's involvement. I can say, like I said, to Simon's credit, very heavily involved directly in my mum's case now, but even then, the company, the installer, is running rings around all of us. They threatened me with legal action. So to answer your question, even what power does TrustMark have? I've got the CEO of TrustMark personally involved in this case, and the sheer brazenness of the installer and their mediator. They've got an army of solicitors now, right, who are vetting their emails before they respond. So no power. They can't do anything. We still haven't, no work has begun. So the initial quote I got for the dry rot when we discovered it in October 23 was about 11,000 to fix. A year later, it was about 24, 25, and now it's in the electrics. So rewiring, potential roof replacement, we're looking at £200,000. And if you've got the very top of TrustMark involved and it's still just going round and round in circles, like where else do we go here?
Yeah, Amanda, please. Go on.
Our freeholder actually said they'd consider knocking the whole estate down and rebuilding it.
And for the final question to the 4 of you, talk Crichton.
Thank you. The time has run really, so it really just remains to say thank you for your evidence of coming in. I mean, you've typified an industry that seems out of control. You've called them rogue traders, but I'm looking at the website of the company that installed your mum's insulation. They're there. They've got TrustMark. They've got Stars and Trustplanet. They're still running. And you're paying over 100 grand yourself. They haven't given you anything.
No. So the repairs, where we've just been very fortunate is their liability insurer has become involved. Most of the cases that I've been hearing about, no one talks about liability insurance. And why they got involved, just so you understand, is they gave me 4 offers. When they discovered that it was a problem and they discovered that it was their fault, they sent the lead gen guy to negotiate 4 offers. 1, they get their own people to fix everything. I said, absolutely not. Can't trust them to do it. 2, they said, you pay half the cost and we'll pay half the cost. This is what I mean when they're that brazen. 3rd offer was they asked for a lump sum, for me to work out a figure that we can arrange for repairs ourselves and they will pay out. And they'll write up a contract from the solicitor to say, we've paid you and that's it, it's all over to you. When I gave them the figure, at the time, in hindsight, they said no, which I'm really grateful for, was about £50,000. Because the repairs are like £200,000 now. So,
Okay. The time is run. I think from Mr. Hoyles is forget accreditation and start enforcement.
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay, thank you.
I just say thank you for having me here.
yeah, thank you.
Well,
Yeah, definitely.
thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Shabir, and thank you, Damian. The evidence you've given us, I think, is absolutely compelling. It's very, very worrying what you've said about the future as well, and we will be. The next panel is sitting listening. I think they can probably anticipate we're going to ask for their response to what you've said, and we will be raising this further as part of the report that we complete as a committee with recommendations to government. But thank you again. I'm not going to ask you to come back in.
Bill, just 1 second.
I am going to ask you to come
Please.
back in. Go on.
We haven't spoke about foam insulation being sprayed on under roofs. We will be back here again.
We are going to ask the next committee about that. But,
We will be back again.
Thank you for the reminder, and very much, very, very grateful to you all. I'm going to suspend the session while we change over to the panel's order. And welcome back to the second session today of the Energy Security and Net Zero Select Committee and our look into retrofitting schemes that have gone wrong. I'll ask the three panellists if you'll briefly introduce yourselves, and then you can probably guess from the last panel the questions we're going to ask you. But if we start on my left, Simon, please.
Okay, Simon Ayers, Chief Executive at TrustMark.
Hi everyone, I'm Andy Manning. I'm Head of Energy Systems Transformation at Citizens Advice.
Hi everyone, I'm Ian Rippin. I'm Chief Exec of MCS.
Well, Simon and Ian, thank you for being here. You heard the really quite graphic and at times really harrowing testimony from Zach and from Amanda and the support they had as well about what's happened to them. What's your reaction to what you've heard? And while you're thinking about answering that question, we had industry specialists contact us telling us that our session today undermines the sector. I've got to say to you that I think what undermined the sector is what happened to Zach and Amanda. Your reaction? Who wants to go first?
Well, if I may, I'll start off. Firstly, can I say that I think Zach and Amanda have been through an absolutely horrible experience which they should never have gone through. We are talking about not just recent processes, but in real terms, 30 years of different delivery, which has probably never been managed, audited and controlled as it should have been. We are now seeing other areas being raised in the public domain. The Minister obviously gave a speech on the 27th of January regarding the solid wall and the internal wall installation, which I'm sure I will get some questions on at some point, talking about the businesses that are now suspended. So we are now acting upon the information we have from audits that we are undertaking. We are looking at remediating wherever we can to ensure that those homeowners are put back to a place where they have a warm, healthy and safe home. But we're also looking at then how that moves across the other sectors. I probably would say, from a TrustMark point of view, we started to build a database back in 2020 when we took over, because TrustMark has only been looking after the technical monitoring and auditing of ECO since 2020, and it really didn't commence till 22 with ECO 4. And so we have data on a number of years that we are now looking at. On that data, we are now acting to make sure that we are making improvements as we move forward. But I do think that it is now time for change. I do believe that there is now a requirement to look at the whole process and bring in the ability for a consumer to have probably a central point that they can engage with that then manages everything from that. There are it's way, way too complex. And I say that from somebody that works within the industry. If you look at the process all the way through, and it's not that anyone's particularly done that wrong, I think we have years of bolting on additions rather than actually looking at root causes and then bringing that together.
Okay, but thank you. Andy.
Thank you. So, it was extraordinarily powerful evidence that we received. I think this is exactly the right, I agree with you, Chair, it's exactly the right time for us to be looking at it. It feels to me that we're at a pivotal moment. With the Warm Homes Plan, we're looking to accelerate the rollout of home upgrades for the benefit of consumers and the benefit of society in delivering our net zero ambitions and for growth ambitions. So you're absolutely right. The key to accelerating that growth is to build consumer confidence. So I agree, we do need a reset for how we get there. So we look from the perspective of the customer and make that a simple process. We heard about a patchwork of schemes and bodies, so we need a single accreditation scheme with easy ways of accessing through there. Then a simple redress process, so the potential of a single ombudsman to listen to the cases. And then I think briefly came up at the end that point about legal enforcement, how to ultimately make sure we've got an effective legal enforcement regime. And underpinning all of that, which I think Zach spoke very, very powerful for, is consumers will need advice at every part of the journey. We know very strongly when people talk to us. The value they put to independent, trusted advice. So we need that at every part of the process. So you get a consistent message wherever you live in the country. And specifically, I think Zach spoke very powerfully about how he felt he was, despite his struggles, he was in quite a privileged place, that he was able to engage with the complexity. So if you look at the role that we play with our energy static advocacy, we have an extra help unit, which is specifically there to help people in vulnerable circumstances to navigate these complicated things. So as part of our advice, we need the equivalent of an extra help unit, something to specifically help those in vulnerable circumstances to navigate these issues.
Thank you. Ian.
Yeah, deeply depressing evidence that the committee's heard. I think from the MCS point of view and the role we play directly supporting the boiler upgrade scheme, we operate quite differently. One of the things that you get if you're a recipient of a boiler upgrade scheme grant for a heat pump is you get a call from MCS, and you get that a week or two after you've had your installation, and that's a really important radar for us to make sure that the installer's delivered exactly what they promised, and we stay in contact with that consumer. So I completely understand the challenges that we've heard about, but the answer has to be that direct contact responsibility that MCS takes for complaints as well. 2 years ago, we started a programme of reforming MCS. It used to be part of government, and it was novated back in 2018 when my team took it on. And that has been a long process to get us to a point where we're rolling out what we call the new MCS 2025. And part of that is making sure that consumers are not passed from pillar to post when they've had a failure with a heat pump or solar PV. They get their case managed. And we do that in partnership with industry. We are absolutely separate from installers. We have contractual relationships with installers that impose on them, if we need them to do things to remedy a situation, we do impose those remediation tasks. I think the other point I would say is that the recipe here, from my point of view, and I'm not saying it's all great within the world of small-scale renewables, low-carbon technology, but I'd contrast what you've been hearing with how the boiler upgrade scheme is being managed. I think it is important that we work with industry, but we hold them to account at every step, and we set an expectation early, and that's why we have assessors that are on the MCS payroll that go to site if there is a complaint. It's an unreasonable expectation that consumers who are unfamiliar with this technology to determine what the root cause is. It's just not right. They don't know whether it's a sales issue, a design issue, an installation issue. So that's our role.
Thank you. Before I bring my colleagues in, Ian, you used this phrase about holding to account. I think the evidence we just heard is that, amongst other things, there's too close a relationship, or there's been too close a relationship between the installers and the regulators. How much responsibility do TrustMark and MCS have for what we've just heard?
We're very different schemes. MCS is a standards-backed scheme. Standards are written by industry for industry. We benefit from 200-odd experts who help us maintain and develop those standards. The certification scheme that me and my team are responsible for, we deliver that through our certification partners, and we hold them to account too. So it's about the flow of data.
The certification side of it's working well, you're telling us?
We wouldn't be reforming MCS if I felt that it was perfect, no.
All right, okay, well thank you for that. And Simon, obviously what we heard suggests that things have not been working well for the role of TrustMark. What's your role in what we've just heard?
So our role is very much that we work in a different way to the MCF scheme. We were established in 2005 as an umbrella scheme, low cost by government. And the purpose of that scheme is to work through scheme providers, which we're talking about here are accreditation bodies, the certification schemes. We will hold those schemes accountable under the framework operating requirement. And that has been strengthened literally year by year as we move forward. And we're now in the next process of looking at how A sanctions policy will then pick up the accountability to a higher level. We work closely with UCAS, who oversee the certification bodies. But we also very much, as Ian has alluded to, have an internal team of surveyors who are independent, because we are a government scheme. The government own TrustMark. It's their brand. We are funded purely from the fees we collect from the installers. So that's a £40 registration fee per annum and a £45 lodgement fee that we take for the work for each property that gets lodged. So we are a low-cost scheme in those terms. However, we also, I think, should take into account that if you look at the overall insulation schemes, including some low-carbon measures, there are 361,000 homes that have seen a benefit from the delivery of insulation, low-carbon under Eco4 and under the other green home schemes. So I think we have to make changes to ensure that we avoid what's happened, without a doubt. We are strengthening all the different areas to help deliver that. And we mustn't forget that we are now looking at the advantages of technology. So one of the questions earlier had been, how do you track a job as it's being delivered? You cannot, cost-wise, send somebody to site for every single job that's been undertaken. But you can now, through technology, start to identify plans, because we look at design. We will start looking at the technology that will allow us to read and understand documents, but also photographs and videos. You bring that together with physical intervention, and we are starting to put a new level of capability into the system. So there are opportunities now to scale up the rigour that we put into the audit and compliance regime. The other point that's been mentioned already is about we also have to help consumers understand. Anybody that's looked at whether it be insulation, heat pumps, you go onto the internet and within probably 30 or 40 seconds you're confused by what you're reading. So we do need to have a very common central source of information that will support. But we also need to have tools built that will allow consumers to understand what they're really looking at, things like solar panels, batteries, all those areas. We need to help that process. If I go back to the Each Home Counts review, which is where really everything started to change, part of that had been an information hub had been suggested, and that was one of the 27 recommendations. That's never been implemented, and I think that would be a sensible solution by an organisation externally looking in and supporting that help. So there are a number of things I think that we can do quickly, but longer term I also believe that we now probably have to look at how we hold the installers to more accountability. So part of what we need to look at as TrustMark is how we do that at the same time.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I was just struck, you quoted 361,000 successful installations. I don't think what we heard in the last session was described as successful for 1 minute, was it? And you only really seem to get involved when the BBC published their inquiry. Now, I note what you say, that you can't attend every site, but that's pretty much what's
a caveat.
Was saying.
So,
yeah.
In terms of the interaction, if we go back to 2022 when we started collecting data for these new schemes, which is when we came into play in this sector, we quickly started to build a number of digital programs that would support. One of those digital programs that we really started seeing benefit from in 2023 had been an analytics platform. That analytics platform during the mid part of 24 identified some challenges with reporting in terms of some of the installer reporting, which we picked up and worked with Ofgem. We then started to see a trend around poor non-compliance, first-time non-compliance with internal wall and external wall, which is where we raised, and that was at the same time that the BBC event came through. So we were aware, and we were starting to then target that. Yeah, at the same time the BBC ran their report.
Okay. Yes, I'm trying to move on, but quickly, Andy. Yeah.
I think it's just worth noting at this point that accreditation's only mandatory for government schemes. So there's a world of measures being installed where there is no requirement for accreditation. So we're talking about the effectiveness of those schemes, but there's another world out there where there's no accreditation at all, so we certainly think accreditation should be mandatory across all measures being taken.
Thank you. And Ian, you.
I think the truth is there's been an over-reliance on quality management systems. And so we talk about delivered quality. We're not really that interested how you get there, but as an installer, you've got to evidence to us that you've delivered quality. The other thing about resources, that's a bit of an excuse, frankly. What we should be doing is risk-based assessments. So we drive our assessor resources at the places where we consider to be the most risk. And we reward, and frankly we have to, installers that do great work that we don't hear about through our outreach programme or complaints.
Thank you for those. We've talked so far this afternoon about the objective being warmer homes and lower bills. My colleague's going to ask some questions about how we get this right in the future with those objectives, and indeed the other ones, Simon, that you mentioned around the range of measures that can be installed. I'll ask Mike Reader to go first.
We'll ask that, Chair, but Simon, can I ask you one direct question? How many more people are there like Zach prior to the BBC being involved in your CRM system now, emailing TrustMark saying, I need help, can you send a surveyor, can you help me? And they're getting the answer that Zach had prior to the BBC being involved, which is, we can't help you, take it up with the installer. Do you have a feel from the customer data you have how many people are asking you for help? And at the moment, maybe because your capacity, maybe because it isn't the process you follow, those people aren't getting help from you.
So the process we have is a complaint process that everyone's been privy to. I think as an example, so you'll be aware at the moment Ofgem are writing out to 69,000 properties that have had external wall and internal wall installation fitted. They are coming back through those letters now. There are, to give you an example, I think over 50,000 have gone out. The contact centre has taken roughly 300 interactions. And from that, we are now looking at around 200 audits that will be required. These are properties the same as Zach's, where there has been external wall installation and other measures, because we need to remember it's a project, it's not one measure.
That's through the Ofgem work, but are there people who have emailed you that are sitting waiting for help, but as was before the BBC?
There will be nobody in the TrustMark list waiting directly for help from TrustMark, because we will pass those certification issues onto the scheme providers, which is certification body. So, for an example, one we received last night from an address in Luton has been actioned today.
Thank you.
Luke Murphy, quickly.
It's a very quick question, and should acknowledge that me and Simon have met before because TrustMark is based in my constituency. But just, I think earlier in your comments you said that you are responsible for holding the scheme providers to account. But it's from what Zach said, he made it quite clear that they were not being held to account. They were being he was being constantly sent back to the installer. So in that situation, what was TrustMark doing to hold that scheme provider to account, and how can we be assured that this hasn't happened to more people and not still happening to more people?
I think in Zach's case, and I can't remember the exact details, and I can confirm that back to the committee, but the complaint had commenced, and I think it was probably best part of a year that really gone by before the body had started to interact. There are rules around when legal systems become into play about how they engage, and that's through their certification process, accreditation process, and also some of the framework that we have in the process they have needs to be changed because it actually prevents direct action, and that's something we've done with our framework recently. Then I think the accountability there is then really for us to now start looking at how we engage with those scheme providers to make really a programme of faster action to remediate those properties. Now, I know using the Ofgem case from what's happened recently, the remediation that's taking place of properties is probably at a rate that I've never seen before. On the basis that we carried out a massive audits before Christmas, when we have got about 12,000 pieces of evidence for different properties at the moment to get them remediated. So there is a programme in place to start now holding people accountable.
I'll go to the line of questioning then on the future. So government aims to install around 600,000 heat pumps by 2028. How can the government ensure that failures with insulation are not repeated with the rollout of low carbon heating? And perhaps I'll start with Andy and we'll go down.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think there's probably four main elements to this. We think we should be moving towards a single accreditation scheme which should cover all technologies aligned to home upgrades. That will allow a consistent, high quality scheme to be adopted.
And that'd be accreditation scheme covering privately funded as well?
It'll be covering all measures taken, regardless of whether via government schemes or otherwise. Again, one, that gives increased expectations of successful implementation. And also, if you can do that under one badge, it starts building that consumer confidence. So we can put that towards a recognised mark that people can look for, which gives that consumer confidence to make these changes, which are good for consumers. Then I'll pick up redress. Again, we've got to, looking from the consumer angle, make the routes of redress as simple as possible. So that takes you towards a single ombudsman. Third part is that legal enforcement. I think Shabir was talking earlier about that. We see instances where effectively it ultimately is left to the customer to try and take people to court, or it sits with trading standards who have priority decisions to make about their resources. So we need to find a way of making sure that element is properly resourced in a ring-fence way. And the final bit, underpinning all of that, is that one thing that comes most strongly through from the people we talk to is access to independent advice at all stages of the journey, and as I said earlier, with a special focus for those who may need more support because they're in vulnerable circumstances.
Thank you. Ian, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure, Mike. I think MCS in the work we've been doing to reform MCS and get it ready for the future. And the question you pose, MCS is not just for a boiler upgrade scheme, it's for able to pay and anybody who's having a microgen measure on their home. We've identified that you need to get the right organisation doing the right work. So the certification bodies we work with deliver certification assessments. What we don't want them to do is handle complaints. So MCS will handle complaints, and that'll be a single place to come. And that we put governance around that includes citizens' advice, which Consumer Scotland, the Council of Consumers Northern Ireland. So we want them to hold us to account, because we're making promises that we will manage complaints through to a conclusion for the consumer. And then when we find there are non-conformities, we'll pass those to the certification bodies, because that's what they're good at. So that's our conclusion of what we need for the future.
And this inquiry is about warm homes, but just if the chair will just allow me, for new homes, there is a suggestion that the government won't be mandating a standard for new heat pump installations like in the new build house building programme. Are you aware of that, and are you concerned about that?
Yes, I'm aware of that. So MCS, the installation standards, have been forged over 16 years. You know, we know that the technical truths, we call them, in the installation standards. If you follow them, you're going to stand a really good chance of having a great installation. And we're offering that to government and say, why don't you use those standards? Without any condition attached, you know, they can legislation, building regulations, I understand that. You don't need to be MCS certified to install a new build today. So, but why not comply with standards that have been proven to work would be my suggestion.
So, Simon, I'll come to you with a different question, if that's all right. I'm just watching my time tick away. What role does regulation have in determining the installation of heat pumps only occurs where it's appropriate, rather than everywhere that retailers find a willing customer?
Quite interestingly, I think we talk about a project on a property. So it isn't whether it's a heat pump, whether it's solar PV, whether it's installation. It is a project for a property that brings that whole property to a point where we should be thinking about reducing the cost of running the property, not just the carbon, because actually when we talk about fuel poverty schemes, we have to reduce all those things. So I believe there is a position where we now need to align, and I think that's already happening, in fairness to my colleague at the end, Ian, where we're talking about how we align the low carbon, the insulation measures, but also with things such as the building safety regulator, the competent person scheme, because actually there are so many different schemes that you are trying to plug into the same process, there becomes confusion. Shabir was talking earlier about the case in Luton with the building regulations notification process, where it is, you have to be within a competent person scheme, so you have to join a different scheme again to be able to notify that work. The building safety regulator is looking, obviously, with the outcome of the inquiry to see how they will change those schemes moving forward. That may include licensing for some of the high-rise areas, which I guess will come into another area. So my plea probably, and I think Ian and myself have spoken long and hard about this, is that we bring a commonality of delivery across these multiples of schemes so that regulation can be based around a common set of standards, a common set of delivery mechanisms, and picking Andy's point up around ensuring there's independent advice available at the stages through the programme, ensuring that you have the ability for redress, but I think also in the future, and we must remember that we are now talking about a level of work to a property which isn't just changing a boiler, it's now talking from a £3,000 or £4,000 job to a £30,000, £40,000 job in some cases, that we are aligned and make sure there is recourse, redress, and everything that goes with that.
Thank
you. Just to echo some of that, I think I often say that complexity is the enemy of compliance. Installers are often time poor, arguably admin poor, and they just want to know what the instructions are and what they need to comply with. So we need that honesty, that relationship directly that we believe we have with installers under MCS, and backed by standardised assessments, not what one body wants to do or one assessor might decide or their expertise might lead them to. We need a clear set of standardised assessments that installers understand too, so it's open and transparent, and that's what we offer. We want standardisation because we're a standard-setting organisation.
I just add one last thing, sorry, just in terms of part of, and I think Damian talked about it earlier, and is that when we talk about warranties, we have to create a common set of requirements for warranties so that it isn't sort of a potluck style process. We need to have that commonality of delivery so that whoever is supplying the protection, and whichever methodology it may be, that it will protect the consumer in the event something did go wrong.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to the committee. I want to ask you about the government's actions on failures under Eco4 and the Great British Installation Scheme. And my first question is for all of you, but I'd like to start with you, Simon, because you referred earlier to 30 years of things being not done as they should have been. So the government statement said that the systemic issues are particular to solid wall installation installed under the Eco4 and GBIS schemes. How confident can we be that the Minister is right?
I think we can be very confident, and the reason I say that is there is a subtle difference in previous schemes. Previous schemes were normally single measure schemes. So the original CERT-CES, Eco 1, 2, 2T, 3 had all been based around a single measure being installed. Eco 4 suddenly moved to a multi-measure whole house approach. So there was a stark difference between previous eco schemes and the latest eco scheme. And that required, if we then start thinking about the introduction of things like retrofit coordinators, all the design programs that came into play, and the fact that you're bringing multiples of different trades into a property at the same point, because you will have heating engineers, you will have installation engineers, it may be a heat pump, it can be windows, that it's a very slightly, well, sorry, not very, it is a very different style of delivery. From the data that we collected around all of the Eco4 programmes, we started to be able to identify each of the areas and in each of the schemes. So we are confident that it's specific to Eco4, and those higher non-compliances that we identified were within the solid wall insulation and the internal wall insulation areas.
My question was specifically about solid wall installation and some of the issues that were being raised earlier by the people who've unfortunately suffered terribly. Would specifically, there doesn't seem to me to be any reason why they shouldn't apply to solid wall insulation being installed in isolation of any other measures. So I'm not quite clear. If you could just expand on that point.
Okay. So when we have looked and we look back, so our main jurisdiction has been Eco4, but we have had experience and knowledge of data around Eco3 in previous schemes. We have not seen those high level non-compliance rates within those other schemes. Yeah. What we have seen is in the new scheme, where there are multiples of measures, there is a defined first-time non-compliance rate. So there is a difference.
And if I can quickly ask Andy and Ian to comment as well.
Yeah, no, I'll only make a quick comment, just to note that from the people who are coming to see us, the largest component of people who talk to us about insulation is actually about spray foam. There's far more people contact us about issues with spray foam than solid walls. So it's just sort of reiterating that point that we need to look beyond government schemes to how we do accreditation, which also follows that obviously we welcome what the government have done, and removing installers from the accredited list is clearly the right move to do, but there is effectively a market that for those installers to move into where accreditation isn't needed, so we do need to close those opportunities off.
Yeah, MCS is not directly involved in the administration of Eco4, but I wrote to officials in August last year, and I'm happy to submit that as a piece of evidence, where we were starting to hear about issues around installation, multi-measure installations and heat pumps or solar PV being part of a package. And it seems to us that there are complex contracting arrangements, mainly subcontracting, which if you're not in control of, you end up having issues. So we've steadily got ourselves involved in Eco4 because there are MCS installers contributing to it.
Okay. My next question is, the government immediately suspended 39 installers for poor practice under the Eco4 and GBIS retrofit schemes. Given we're already facing a shortage of workers in this sector, how can we meet the level of retrofitting required in the UK to meet environmental targets? Do you want to start in this time?
Yes, I can go first this time. I was shocked to see that. I think perhaps take a different approach where we are suspending installers every single week, but we work with them through a process, and they have every opportunity then to put things right. But if they do not take that opportunity, then they're withdrawn from the scheme, and that's the way we police it. I think we also have to remember that we've got to work with industry. We have to encourage more entrants into the market. On average, we get 3 installers a day joining MCS to fit solar PV or heat pumps, and that's good, but I want to see more. So this can't look like the Wild West. It's got to look like a place where you can develop a career and a business, and those that do it right need to be rewarded, and those that don't need to attract more of our focus. So, and that's what's baked into the changes we're developing for MCS this year.
Andy?
So I think the work we do here on this committee is important. I genuinely believe if we get the consumer protections framework right, that will bring the consumer confidence, which in turn brings the growth in the market. So if you think about the importance of a single quality mark that consumers can believe in, that I think will help develop the growth of the market, which in turn then gives the confidence that installers need to engage with the market. So this is getting this protection right is how we stimulate the growth.
Simon, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, please. So for us, we have a similar role to MCS in terms of where installers are suspended. We work with those installers through the certification bodies to bring them back into the marketplace, because we do have a limited number of PAS accredited businesses to deliver installation. I think the other challenge that we have generally within the construction and energy sector is that we are looming towards a bit of a cliff edge of people that will be coming out of the sector without people coming in. So we've just carried out some research into skills for the micro and small businesses. And if you look at the age group at the moment, that's sort of late 40s, early 50s, and a high percentage are saying that they're not taking on new people, they are just winding their businesses down. So we are in a skills crisis as well as a delivery crisis. So we have to find that gap to fill to then plug in the entrepreneur or new people coming through. So a number of challenges, unfortunately. And
Andy, you've already indicated that you do think that it's wrong that companies are still free to operate outside of the government schemes. Do you have anything to add on that, about what you think should happen?
So it is about, I think I will be repeating myself, it's about ensuring that the same protections are available to those, however, whatever route they're taking to funding these upgrades, because we are going to, if we're going to deliver our clean power mission, we are going to need individuals to make those choices and make the most of the able to pay market. So yeah, I think I'll just repeat my point about needing those protections to apply more generally.
Finally, is there a role for TrustMark and MCS in rescinding certification for individuals identified as below standard traders and preventing them from operating elsewhere? Ian, you sort of already touched on this, but...
Absolutely. I think one of the things we do is we track directors, these characters who move around and set up businesses again, and we watch that. Every single MCS certified installer is monitored by us in the background in terms of business probity, because very often when you lose control of your business, you lose control of your quality. So I am just we've got to be really careful here, because satisfaction on the boiler upgrade scheme as monitored by us is extremely high. 94.5% on average of people we talk to everybody are satisfied with their heat pumps. So there are some fantastic installers out there that I call artisan installers, smaller installers, right the way through to corporate installers. So we need more of them, but we need to police those that are not good enough.
Simon?
I think the area that TrustMark has to build is probably a greater interaction directly with businesses, so that we can act more quickly. At the moment, we suspend a business and we suspend them for all categories of work, whereas they may have multiples of different areas of work that they would be delivering. So we are looking at how we improve those areas and build those areas to a better level of understanding, but also that will bring a level of confidence back to the sector.
Thank you.
Simon, do we need the TrustMark brand to be stronger and get to a point where consumers will look to you to go to an installer that they believe is going to do a good job, so that people who aren't accredited just don't get the work? Is that where we need to head to?
I would probably go back to the original basis of why TrustMark was established as a government brand, which was back in the late 1990s, before it came TrustMark 2005 and 2005, for that exact purpose, which was to have a single organisation that could be contacted and would have oversight, would manage and deliver a programme and ensure that remediation and redress were undertaken.
Why do you think that hasn't happened? I mean, a leading question, I'm assuming it hasn't.
So I think it's always a challenging scenario when it's a voluntary situation. So as a scheme, if it's voluntary, you are expecting people to sign up if you put that in today's terms, where you have fewer tradespeople and more work, it's more challenging to get them to work in the owner-occupier market, especially. I think we should look at areas, for my sins, I'm a been at Corgi, but also when that started, but also Gas Safe Register, where licensing came into play in terms of gas engineers. It removes a lot of that variance that we have in terms of delivery.
So if it's possible with gas engineers, it's possible more widely.
Well, gas engineers have a defined accreditation route, but they also have a licence route. And in one of the key points with the gas scheme is that you have a business that is registered, but you have individuals that are also identified. And it's been mentioned here already about subcontracting. In some of the areas of construction, as we know, you can have 4, 5 and 6 levels of subcontracting, which causes some of those issues.
Sure. Ian, then Andy.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, Chair, and it's not about marketing TrustMark or MCS, it's about consumers knowing where to turn to. One of the things we are doing is through our outreach programme, we position what MCS actually is. I've got an MCS installation at home, but Mrs. Rippin doesn't know we've got an MCS certificate. So it's vital, actually, that if you can't get a solution from your installer, who do you go to? This is what Citizens Advice talk about in their reports. We're reflecting that because it's a maze. You don't know where to go to. So that's why we talk to every single consumer and say, we're here if you need us. Let's hope you don't, but we're here if you need us.
Right. Andy?
Just observation on that. So we've done some research on where people go to for advice, particularly with heat pumps, and that specific advice was, and both MCS and TrustMark are very much at the bottom end of where people go. And I think it does matter, and it does require promotion, because having confidence in that mark is how we'll build the market. And as an aside, that going back to the earlier conversations, I think someone asked a question about what would you recommend about insulation. The second highest common place where people go to advice is their friends and family. So it really, after tradespeople themselves. So this word of mouth is crucially important if we're going to deliver clean power. We have to get this right. So that word of mouth is a positive message, reflecting positive experiences.
There used to be a place where you could get advice, and a report that the MCS Foundation published on energising advice identified that this is a real gap. Maybe not in Scotland, because there's some funding there, but Energy Saving Trust do not have the funding to run that operation elsewhere in the UK.
Thank you. You're a Hophouse.
So we've been sitting here for 2 hours, and forgive me, but I feel myself to be in two separate panels here. We hear about the outrageous thing that has happened to Amanda, to Zach. They still haven't got any redress. We're hearing from you that, it's sort of all quite under control. We can deal with it. We want to go into the future, absolutely. And I understand that the MCS was not necessarily responsible or not involved in solid wall insulation, but I would like to understand, and if I was the MP for any, either Zach or for Amanda, how can I help them? They've gone round and round in circles, and that happens with a lot of things. And this is where, even as a Member of Parliament, it becomes very, very frustrating that we cannot actually get to a point where we can get some quick redress for my constituents, or for any of our constituents, because the whole system seems to be set against that. And if we're not careful, all you can do as a private consumer is to be advised to take your own legal action. People don't have the money to do that, and therefore they're depending. Or ultimately, quite aggressive installers then threaten their own legal actions, and therefore people then just go backwards and do nothing. And I find that very, very frustrating. So where can we get to a point where my constituents, or Amanda and Zach, or indeed council officers who actually want to get to a point where citizens get redress and justice, how can we make that happen? And I haven't heard anything from the panel so far where you think we can make that happen, and what support would you need from this government in order to make that happen?
I'll take that first. I'd reflect that that is the experience that consumers clearly are having, and while MCS isn't part of solid wall insulation, there are issues, small number of issues, I'd say, as a percentage, that just bounce around. So the responsibility we take under the reformed MCS is that central point of contact is us. You get a case handler, you get a case, so you don't have to chase around, because this is complicated, and therefore consumers need they're hand-holding all the way through the process. And it needs to be backed by the right warranties, financial protections, guarantees. There's a lot said about these. We have identified that these are not fit for purpose. And nobody gives you their claims history because that's commercially sensitive, which is why for 3 years MCS has started selling these policies so we could understand whether they were actually meaningful to consumers. So what I'm trying to describe is that the most key thing here is that one place to complain, and MPs do contact me. We take it on, and then we make sure that the installer is held to account early. The longer you leave this, the more protracted and horrible it becomes. And that's just the years worth of pain. It's just unbelievable, really. So we know that the recipe is you get to site early, set an expectation for the consumer and the installer. I'm not saying that happens as readily as it needs to, but that's certainly what MCS is building.
Can I just ask, would a single point of contact not best be placed in the council? Whenever we are sort of asking around what in surveys, who would, although councils also get a lot of complaints, but who would residents trust most? Is it sort of an industry body or an independent body, or would they actually go to the council? A lot of people would respond the council, yet the councils do not have the capacity currently to do that. But ultimately, if they had the capacity, would you say that would ultimately still be a good point of contact for residents and constituents?
It is essentially it's where consumers are going to find the answers, and I'm not sure. Certainly in microgeneration, there's some complexity there, and I don't know that councils have that understanding. That said, I'm not just advocating for a role of MCS. We are independent, charity owned. So in a sense, if we're part of a network, as long as the consumer finds a place where somebody is going to take on their issue, and that's what we're offering for low carbon technology. How you get there, we want that to be as easy to understand as possible, which is why we ring everybody and say, if you do have a problem, this is the number to talk, you can talk to us about it.
I mean, I've asked you many questions. Anybody else wanting to come in?
Yeah, no, I think what we are advocating for is a reset of the consumer protection framework with a single accreditation scheme, well-resourced legal enforcement, and a simple redress with a single ombudsman. So I do think if we get that right, that should reset the consumer protection framework.
For my point of view, I think we have a warm home plan, which is what £6.6 billion worth of investment to take place. I think within that plan there should be the opportunity from government to look at how you support the information to the consumer, you help them make the right choices for their property. I believe that there should be also a level of audit and compliance and requirement placed upon the businesses, so that actually the businesses almost now are required to go into a formal contract to deliver, so that they can be held further accountable. We have to go through a whole process of making sure that the work is at the right standard through different photographs and everything else. But also if we are looking at, when we think about the private rental sector, which is obviously on the consultation at the moment, but also the owner-occupier market, if you are spending a fairly large sum of money on your property, you want to validate that that property or the work you've undertaken meets those requirements. On two counts, firstly about energy efficiency, but secondly, I believe, as Amanda mentioned earlier, this is about then an annual check. So through sensors, whatever it would be now with technology as well, that you are measuring that property is actually doing what it should be doing. And if it isn't, that can be enacted with very quickly and remediated. So, I believe that should all be now really driven from a central source.
And your own rules, do you think they should be extended, and what is the scalability of that?
The scalability for TrustMark is all around funding, if I'm honest. We are a scalable business. It's always been set up to do that. We're a not-for-profit social enterprise. It is about delivering for the right reasons, and I feel incredibly uncomfortable about the earlier panel on the basis of what I've seen, and the fact that I actually went up to meet Zach at Luton. I've seen his property. And driving home from there, I can assure you there was a bit of soul-searching going on. If we can't allow that to happen in the future, we have to put a new map around. I think we've got to recognise that through some of the new eco programmes at the moment, and Warms Home, you will still have a mix of measures. So you may have low carbon measures and installation measures together. So we've got to make sure there's a single source, not multiple sources again. I believe it's achievable, but it will need a bit of effort, a bit of support and a bit of funding to help that.
So yeah, we've scaled to support the boiler upgrade scheme. In one example being over 40,000 contacts with consumers to check post installation, are they actually satisfied with their installer and the installation itself. We've offered the same service to Eco4. We think it's part of the solution and that's what I said earlier about you get in early and sort problems out. Which I know are different for insulation measures, and that's not our remit, but certainly on heat pumps and solar PV, that makes a lot of sense to have that contact. So yeah,
you're ultimately satisfied with the support and the scalability. So you think for what you need to have been set up for, you're okay.
Absolutely, we proved that last year with 274,000 installations under MCS. We've got an active help desk that receives numerous 100 calls a day from installers and consumers. We operate that, we operate outbound, and we operate assessors in the field. So, for the installations that are certified under MCS, that's £30 that an installer pays us, and we want to add value for that. The profit we make, if we do, goes to the MCS charity to plough back into the industry.
Andy?
I'm just going to note on advice provision. I think we've spoken about the importance of advice to help people navigate the whole customer journey, but I think that will get further complicated as new products come on that start integrating with how we use energy, so heat pumps, EVs, batteries, etc. So the advice provision, we've got to be very careful that it integrates correctly with the energy advice provision that already exists. We've got to make sure the two complement each other.
Murphy.
Thanks very much. There's been a bit of a discussion around, I think in particular with Claire, around previous schemes. In 2015, Ofgem found that around 10% of installations under Eco1 failed their first quality checks. And in Northern Ireland, a 2019 report found that there was a 63% fault rate with cavity wall insulation installed in social housing. Can we really say, given the situation we're now in, that what we've heard from the previous panel, that lessons were learned?
So I can't answer for the 2015 scenario. I think there is an answer here about sharing more data so that we have greater insight.
Sorry, I'm just going to... But Ofgem, you took over the technical reporting, I understand, from Ofgem in 2020.
Technical monitoring in 2020, yeah.
In 20. So you would have been provided with the figures that Ofgem... So you would have known that there was that percentage of issues.
We had no figures when we took over. We took over as a clean break. We didn't have the previous data from Ofgem.
It wasn't publicly available?
There were some published figures, but not all figures were published. Just their normal reporting.
That 10% figure of failure wasn't available?
It would have been identified through analytics, I'm sure of that. But when we took over, we started afresh in terms of the technical monitoring, and then we built our own information and source of data. But we had been cognizant of the fact that there had been previous issues. Some of those, I think Damian had talked about earlier, through warranty schemes and obviously previous incidents with poor cavity installs.
I guess I think what I'm getting at is that I think the suggestion to Claire, in your answer to Claire, was that the problem with Eco4 was the multiple measures, but the data from Ofgem suggests that it wasn't to do with the multiple measures because they were single measures in Eco1. And if TrustMark didn't have that data, could ask questions or hadn't looked at the data or didn't ask Ofgem for the data, there's a bit of a question there about why not. I mean, why didn't TrustMark ask Ofgem for the data?
Well, when we took over
the data.
So when we took over technical monitoring,
yeah.
Okay, so in 2020. We took over technical monitoring. Was a question set that we were given. Prior to that, there would have been data, and we were aware that there were first-time non-compliances. I wouldn't have known it was 10% person. My team may have known, I don't know. I would have to find out and come back to you. On the basis of where we were then moving forward, we were looking at then a very new style of independent auditing that would determine percentages. Prior to that, there was, as you were probably aware, through the various things with Ofgem, technical monitoring was delivered through technical monitoring agents that were aligned to businesses, aligned to the sector, and there was a level of question over how good the auditing had been at that point in time. That's the reason that technical monitoring moved from being within the sector with the energy suppliers until at the point we took over.
I agree with Luke, this is an important question, but Damian made this comment that there could be 10.6 million homes who are affected by a cavity wall installation that's a ticking time, my words, a ticking time bomb. Do you recognise that potential risk?
So the risk we have, we would base upon our current audit programs and the analytics. Previous to when we were taking on the technical monitoring, then that's something I would probably take away and speak to Ofgem about so that we've got better stats and analytics. In the current situation where we are today, we can look at what we have audited in terms of cavity wall, and we are reducing the first-time non-compliances so we don't have that issue moving forward. However, there is possibly a historic piece that Damian was talking about.
Of a very significant nature.
I couldn't make that comment.
That's the point he's making, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, back to Luke.
Yeah. So given that, and there was allusions earlier from Damian about the spray foam scandal, and spray foam is can still be installed through the Great British Installation Scheme, whatever it is now, whatever it is called. I just wondered how concerned you are about that, because my understanding from the figures we've been provided is that, you know, a number of the major mortgage providers will not lend on those homes. So can we be satisfied that the households that are having those measures installed, spray foam installed through that scheme, are not going to end up in a situation where they can't get a mortgage in future on their home? And it would be slightly confusing for a consumer or someone who's got a mortgage to have undertaken that through a government scheme only to find that they can't get a mortgage on their home.
So I think there are a number of factors there, if I may come back on that one, which would be, I believe the reports that are being talked about at the moment, there are about 250,000 spray foam installations in roofs. We have registered with us 6,038 of those installations. We have less than 50 new installations in the past 2 years, on the basis of the issues that we know now around mortgages and the challenges that go with it. Of those 6,000, which were mainly through the Green Home Grant voucher scheme, which it was as we came out of COVID, if we have anything that comes up there, we will push that back through our complaint process to investigate, because there are within that a band which have been installed compliantly. They are the right foam in the right loft and won't cause damage. And we work with a scheme provider called the Property Care Association, who will do surveying and check that process. They've also worked with RICS and with the lenders to look at how that can be achieved. So probably the point, and I think Andy alluded to earlier, is that there is a big market outside of the government scheme, because the government scheme is virtually nil now. It's that side of the area that we should be probably more concerned about and ensure that we're regulating some way.
The guarantee agencies, such as the Cavity Installation Guarantee Agency, SEGA, and the Installation Assurance Authority, are they fit for purpose, Andy?
I think we can just judge on we're interested in the consumer outcomes that we're seeing, and we're not seeing the outcomes we think that are ideal at the moment. On the individual I don't have a view on the individual performance of those organisations, just that we're not getting the overall result that we're looking for at the moment.
Ian?
Yeah, under MCS currently you're obliged to buy an insurance-backed guarantee, and we're not happy with those. They don't do what they say on the tin. Consumers expect a guarantee, and they're typically a 2-year guarantee and highly caveated cease-to-trade policies. So we're moving to change the consumer financial protections under MCS. We're going to be consulting on that soon because we don't think that they are fit for purpose.
So my very clear view on this has always been that we are working with other departments as the building safety regulator, who are at the moment undertaking a review of what a good warranty should look like. It doesn't stipulate the methodology, but it says what should be included. So things like, if a business ceases to trade, what does that mean if you retire? What does it mean if somebody refuses to go back and do the work, that there's a fail to remediate? All of those elements should come into play. And then the point of all of that should be that is wrapped into any warranty or guarantee that's provided in the future to ensure that we have consumers that are protected. I think everyone should then fall into line and offer that same level of protection to a consumer.
Who currently oversees the guarantee agencies? How are they regulated?
So the oversight of anything that's delivered through the regulatory scheme is through a financial protection panel, which review on an annual basis their availability, so that they don't look at necessarily whether the methodology, they're looking at the ability for it to protect the consumer. And on that panel, we have people from the FCA and insurers that are making that judgment.
Primarily, it's the FCA looking at the insurance product itself. Yeah, the panel that involved Citizens Advice, as I mentioned earlier, we've asked them for their opinion on what a reliable, robust consumer financial protection should be going forward, and we've defined that. There are many people who would like to participate in that market, but the obligation on them will be to share their claims data when they refuse a claim, successful outcomes. We as MCS want to see that because it's part of the process of handling a consumer complaint, going through dispute resolution if you need to, but then accessing the financial protection at the end. This is what consumers struggle with. They can't join all those dots together. Someone needs to help them to do that.
I think it's just about, so it is those caveats that have been the concern, and also the consumers aren't really aware of the caveats when they're entering into them, so there's a transparency issue there as well.
They may not know they've even got a policy.
I was going to say, it's not just about joining the dots. It sounds like there could be a lot fewer dots. It sounds like a complete mess. If you ask me.
I would agree, which is the opportunity here is here now to define how we protect a consumer, whether it be insulation, low carbon, any of the schemes where there are supporting funds being paid out by government and the Treasury, I believe, should now fall into a position where we have that support to bring confidence back into the market.
As long as it's remediation, not compensation. People deserve what they've paid for and should get that versus a payout to go away, which we heard earlier in the earlier session.
It's just there's a compulsory scheme to there's an approved register or a license from or accreditation for a regulatory body for a new mobile phone contract, broadband, energy supply, taking out a bank loan, home insurance, car insurance, investing in a pension. Is there any reason why it shouldn't be exactly the same in this sector?
Well, Desna's consulting on the future role of Ofgem. We're very supportive of an extended role. Ofgem's focus, from my perspective, has been about protecting consumers from problems with their electricity bill or gas bill. In our world, these are devices that power your home. That's a very different market. So we will be encouraging this review to look at an extension to the role of Ofgem, who we work with already on the boiler upgrade scheme.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. If you're installing measures not under a government scheme, you've got less you've got the right to less protection than for your mobile phone, which can't be right.
The regulator has a role to play, as do all the regulators. But I believe that at the moment we have very few styles of A-rated insurers, for instance, that will play in this marketplace, in the home improvement marketplace generally, including the regulatory area. We need to change that view of the sector so that you will bring those organisations in to support. I believe there is possibly a role that government should maybe have as well, which is, if we look at insulation, you are expected to put a 25-year warranty on insulation with a lifetime. There are very few organisations in the country that will give a 25-year warranty. So we do need to think that through again and bring that all together.
Thank you. And Young with our last set of questions.
Well, if briefly I can just return to the point of the earlier question I asked, because I cannot understand how you can answer that you have confidence that this is not affecting any other installation installed under other schemes when you say you can't answer for the 2015 scenario. And it appears to me there's quite a heavy reliance on what's been reported to you, and yet what we heard in the first panel was that consumers don't know how to report things, so you're probably not getting the full picture. And what we also heard in the first panel is that somebody is capable of building a business around removing insulation, and that and there was a suggestion there were possibly systemic installation of the wrong type of insulation for the locations. So I just wonder, Chair, perhaps it's a case of going back and whether you might consider, Simon, reflecting on your answer to that one and writing to us later.
Yeah,
we haven't got time to deal with it now.
I was going to say
back into it, but
you preempted what I was going to do at the end, but that's absolutely right. I think, in fact, all three of you, I think, have got recommendations that will need greater depth than we can do in the 6 minutes we have left when Claire's got a load of other questions.
Yes, I've got a bunch of questions to get to, so we'll try and do this really quickly. I think probably we've already talked about the biggest challenges regulating the retrofit industry, so just quick fire if any of you have got any additional points over the ones that have already been made. Ian?
Yeah, I think the relationship, we are putting ourselves inside the relationship that every installer has with their consumer, and we expect them to make a customer commitment that we hold them to account for. So as I said in another answer, this is quite confusing for consumers. What they recognise is everything from the installer dragged in mud into my house and damaged the carpet to my home is cold, which of course is very serious. So I think that I would say that is a key part. It's in a really clear, plain English customer commitment that every MCS installer has to give.
Andy?
So we've talked about advice, but I guess we haven't talked about information. I do think there's a real opportunity for a national information campaign around net zero more generally, but particularly around the consumer protection framework. I guess my observation about needing to take a strategic approach to how we talk to the public about net zero is we're progressing towards a public information campaign supporting the need for more transmission infrastructure, so public acceptance of pylons, which is a perfectly worthy campaign. But if I was designing a public information campaign about net zero, I think I'd start on things like this around consumer protections rather than public support about pylons. So a more strategic approach to how we provide our public information with this at the centre of it.
Thank you for that, because we've just decided to have an inquiry into making the case of the energy transition. So we shall take your evidence there and include it in that inquiry.
Simon?
So I would support wholeheartedly. Information and advice would be the first piece that we need to ensure is common in its approach and valid in its approach. We need to ensure that we have better oversight of competence requirements for businesses, but also the audit and validation and probably the control of those businesses needs to be stepped up. We have to improve our audit and compliance on the installations themselves, and that includes both the pre, the mid and the post, so that we have a record of what's happening, but also validating the outcomes. And we also do have to ensure that we have greater accountability for those that are within the sector delivering money either through the capital or the grant-funded schemes.
Okay. One specifically for you, Andy. Can you give homeowners confidence when they're thinking about investing in energy efficiency measures?
So I think the measures that I discussed earlier, which I won't go over again, I think that's the route to providing confidence. So I do think we need to reform the consumer protection framework in order to deliver that confidence. I mean, the good news story is our evidence shows that where people have put in these measures, there's a 90% of people would recommend them to their friends in general, and that's not meant to devalue the terrible stories we heard earlier. So people do like them, and they are good for consumers. But we do need to make these changes to deliver that confidence.
And I'm not quite sure who this one will be directed at, but currently we have EPCs, which people use to judge the energy efficiency. They're made on the basis that the work's been done correctly. If an EPC has been assessed on that basis, and actually the installation hasn't been done properly, it's faulty, it has to be removed, at that point, should the requirement be to do a new EPC funded by the installer as part of the sort of redress for the errors?
My view would be that would be a yes, because actually you're changing the fundamental value of the property, the U value of the property, therefore it should have a new EPC.
Right. And finally, a question for all of you: is it possible to keep rogue traders out of the sector? Shall I start with Simon this time?
It was mentioned earlier by one of the panels, wherever you have free money, in other words, grant schemes, capital schemes, then it is incredibly challenging, because you will have people trying to access those funds through many different ways. We do need to now think more about how we track phoenixing, because we see phoenixing isn't just about a director moving from one company to another, but it's a relative that may set up a business and transfer. We look for addresses and commonality, so there is more we are doing in that. Unfortunately, we have to work within the parameters of Companies House and what you're allowed legally to do. But we're also tracking now things like mobile phone numbers. We can track email addresses. So there is a greater capacity now to look and stop rogue traders where we can. And we do have a very close working relationship with trading standards, and some of the conversations we have started again at the moment is embedding trading standards back into TrustMark, so that we have a direct relationship and the ability to take action.
And we're going to get Chris Chope to ask one very, very short question.
Well, okay. I'd like to ask Mr. Ayers to start off with whether he believes that the mortgage lenders are wrong to withdraw mortgages from 250,000 homes.
If we're talking about spray foam.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Right. Yeah. In terms of spray foam, I can only really make comment on what I've seen within our 6,000 that we know about. Where they are incorrectly installed, then that roof should be remediated, absolutely. And I can understand why you would then be nervous about the mortgage on that property. There are instances where the correct foam has been installed, and there are surveyors that can be engaged through RICS and through the Property Care Association, where some of the lenders will accept their reports. So that's
who pays for that?
At the moment, that would be the homeowner that would be paying for that. If it's a complaint through our programme, then we will push that back through the scheme provider, which is the Property Care Association, and we would look at how that's funded.
Okay. But can I ask all of you about the issue relating to the preparation for these schemes? I mean, I think anybody listening to the evidence today wouldn't touch a heat pump installation with a barge pole. But for all sorts of reasons, but including the issue around whether or not insulation is needed and other adaptations to the house. And we've got conflicting evidence. For example, Mike Foster, the Chief Executive of the Energy Utilities Alliance, has said that heat pumps are unsuitable for 54% of homes currently using gas boilers. We've got other people who are saying that they need to be, almost every house needs to be adequately insulated, and then there are issues around the extent of such insulation. So isn't the first thing to ensure that before anybody puts in a heat pump, there's been a proper survey on the house, that there's been a proper specification, that they've been told what the heating qualities of the house are at the moment, and there's a guarantee as to what they will be after that insulation. It's no good just installing a heat pump and then sometime after the event saying, well, it doesn't meet all my specifications. Because now the government is, I think, commendably taking some action about all this black mould. But black mould, if you install the heat pump and then you get black mould, are you going to be able to prove that's because you had an inadequate specification in the first place?
Right. So one for Ian Rippin.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one for me.
Put our minds at rest that we're not going to see another disaster with the installation of heat pumps.
I think the evidence is there that you're not, because of what I've said about the boiler upgrade scheme. I would say, though, that whatever your heat source, the best thing to do is use less of it. So you should insulate your home properly and use less, even if it's a gas boiler. I think gas boilers are very forgiving, aren't they? So they'll, and now we've got a different relationship with energy. We can see how expensive that is. A heat pump is the most efficient energy heating device there is on the planet. So we really need to make sure, and MCS requires a site survey, detailed site survey, a design for the installation that then we can hold installers to account to, and they are required to give a system performance estimate to their consumer that you can then check. Because it's always that argument about, well, I expected it to do this. Well, was it written down? Did your installer promise a particular level of performance for your home? Most people just want a warm and cosy home. So that's what we're trying to... It hasn't made us popular, but we've created standards specifically around system performance.
Right. Thank you very much. I'm going to call time there because it's 2.5 hours into the session. I'm going to thank Simon, Ayers, Andy Manning and Ian Rippin for your evidence this afternoon, and repeat my thanks to Zach and Amanda in particular from earlier for what you told us. We will take this away, added into the work we're doing alongside the report we're publishing into the inquiry into heating our homes, and we will take this up with the Minister as well. I am sure that we will return to this numerous times, but thank you all for taking part, and that's the end of the session. Order.